My name is Jeff Smith, and I want to talk to you guys about shared context today. So if you've learned anything from DevOps, it's probably that technology isn't really the problem. It's people, it's meat space, it's communication. Hopefully using shared context will help you clear up some of those communication issues and problems. But what is shared context? In a nutshell, what we're talking about is all the information, all the data surrounding a particular problem or scenario that you're dealing with so that you can come up with an actual valuable solution to folks. The reason it's important to sort of talk about those things, though, is because when we talk about those constraints, those goals, those priorities, those are the things that are going to serve as input into coming up with a solution that can actually be used. So I'll give you a real-world example. I got a friend who's in finance, and I say, hey, man, I need some advice. How do you guys go about managing your finances? And he says, oh, yeah, it's great, man. What we do is we figure out all our bills for the year, and then we create a checking account, and we pre-fund that account with all the bill money for the year. And I said, you know what, your advice sucks. Why? I can't do that, right? It doesn't give me any value. It doesn't take into consideration my constraints, my capabilities, my goals, any of that. He's worried about making life easy for him. I'm worried about not bouncing checks, right? So we've got two completely different sets of goals. So it's important to sort of think about those things when you're talking about your actual problem. This slide is actually a garbage slide that I was going to remove, but didn't have time to, so we're going to talk about how context gets impacted at different levels of the organization, right? So as you move through different teams are going to have different views on the problems. So how do we go about building shared context? Well, the easiest way is to simply ask why. What is it that we're trying to do? Why are we doing it? And then to also think about all of the different factors that go into context. So where does context live? It lives in email messages, right? It lives in water cooler conversation. It lives in IM, Slack. There's all these different places where context lives, and we need to figure out how we can get looped into those conversations. How do we get included in those slides? How do we get included in those links? So this is a story that we ran into where a developer comes up to us and says, hey, how long do we keep Rails logs? And we say 14 days. He says, hell, okay, thanks. And I'm like, whoa, this sounds suspicious. What are you trying to do? He says, oh, we're trying to build an audit trail, and we need 180 days worth of logs. Simply by asking why revealed a whole set of things that we could accomplish for him, right? Instead, what he probably would have done if I hadn't asked more detail is he probably would have went off and created a database table called audit_log, right? And someone would get an alarm for that 3 months later. So by asking the question why, we're able to quickly solve his problem. So instead of that, we said, oh, why don't you just write to a different log file and we'll change the retention period on that. Problem solved. We often talk about this as the XY problem, right? People talk about their attempted solution as opposed to asking about their actual problem. So as a result, you end up wasting a ton of time because you're solving the wrong actual problem, right? So another few ways that you can help bridge the gap with context is data. Data is king. So the more you can share about data, the more information you can radiate, the more effective your conversations and the context that you create around those problems is. Creating a shared presentation of data. It doesn't do anyone good if you've got a nice slick Datadog interface and you give them a bunch of SAR output and say, oh, it's the same stuff. It's not the same stuff. The presentation of data is very important. These two images show the same thing, but one has an image that pops, the other one doesn't. In ops, a big thing that we have is shared execution, right? The idea that we have 3 different methods that we can use to restart a service. But our ops teams all rally around the chatbot solution. Why? Because it's the only solution we have that everyone can use. So it doesn't do us any good if someone says, oh, we're having trouble restarting a service. They restart it via the chatbot, but we SSH into the box and say, oh, restarted fine for me. Doing it the same method creates that shared context so that everyone understands the same problem that we're trying to solve. So remember, your context factors are about goals. Make sure you're sharing the same goals. Make sure you're sharing the same priorities. And make sure you're sharing the same constraints so that you understand what everyone is working towards. Wow, I had a schedule. Oh, story time. Forgot about that slide. We're pretty innovative at Centro. So we decided, hey, you know how we could probably save money? Let's turn off the servers we're not using. Brilliant idea, by the way. Saves a lot of cash. When we did that, we had a developer say, hey, I need a server to stay awake overnight. When he messaged us about it, he was so accustomed to us asking for context, he did it right up front. He said, hey, let me give you the context for what's going on. And that's the sort of value and power of just sort of constantly asking why. So quick recap, keep asking for context. Don't ask your rich friends for financial advice. Make sure you share your goals, your priorities, and your constraints. Thanks.